So, Dad, have you ever had a job that you worked where you just did the bare minimum, nothing extra?
In thinking about this, as I think of all the jobs I had in the Army, even jobs I had before the Army and after the Army, I don't recall ever doing the bare minimum. Was there a day or two? Yeah, but in reality, even the job that I had in DC that made me want to quit the Army, I still did more and put in more effort than was ever required of me because I could have been one of those persons, one of those people in that job because I was surrounded by them, truthfully,
Mhm.
who did the bare minimum. And some of them did less than that and got away with it. Uh, but I think it's it all boils down to the individual's values and what if you're that person that is like, the we used to joke about it in college, the 2-0 and go, uh, you know, then you're going to be mediocre your whole life. But if you're the person who gets a 2-0, but you're busted your butt to get the
Mhm.
2-0 and you're in a crappy job, but you still put forth all the effort to improve yourself, to do the best you can in that job, then you know what? You're very likely, you will, I shouldn't say very likely, you will move on to that next job. You will
Mhm.
get out of that crappy job, whether it's through self-intention of finding another job or a supervisor seeing your efforts and promoting you, seeing potential and promoting you. It's the individual, and
Yeah.
I'm biased, but I don't know how people can live like that, honestly, doing the bare minimum uh, in their life. I honestly don't know how people live that way.
Yeah, and I think it does go back to the individual's values because even if we're talking about work, but then also there's the whole picture of life there that you could be the 2-0 student, but you have the passion outside of school. You could do the bare minimum at the job, but then you have the passion outside of the job that you work towards, and so you're still putting in that effort somewhere else. But what I think is
I'll say
interesting, and as
this
I
though, before you go too
yeah.
far. How you do one thing is how you do everything.
Mm.
That is, I believe that 100%. If you half-ass something, then you're going to half-ass something else because if it's acceptable in your life to half-ass something, then that will carry. That means it's okay to do it here. Then your mind
Mhm.
says it's okay to do it over here. I don't care what it is. It's for me. It goes back to my whole philosophy of there's no work-life balance. It's all life.
Yeah.
You're doing one thing in your life, half-assing or cheating in one area of your life, then your mind says it's acceptable to cheat and half-ass something in another area in your life because it's okay to do it over here.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying. I think there's a little bit of a caveat that if you're talking something in terms of like passion and those type of things, like because when we're talking bare minimum, that's I think that there's like the negative connotation of doing the minimum, but the minimum is what you're there for at the same time. You know what I mean? And so I think that doing that bare minimum and then putting in that effort in other areas where you're more passionate, I don't think that's inherently bad, but I definitely think there's a lot of logic to what you're saying that you do create those patterns with it. And going back to the values of it, that's kind of what I was thinking prepping for this recording was going back to some of my jobs and thinking through, has ever done the bare minimum? Like you said, there's definitely days. That's a whole other
Mhm.
conversation where there's days where you do the bare minimum. But then those values, it's like, what are you actually looking to get out of it? And I thought back to some of my landscaping and construction jobs working for general contractors, and it wasn't necessarily doing extra to provide value to the business, but there was still this extra. And it was usually things, because of the type of job, like cleaning up, making the houses nicer for the people that live there and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that benefits the company because it makes us look better because I help them to have a clean house. But that wasn't the value I had there. The value was that person there should have a clean yard and I want to go be nice for them, right? Um, you talked about the job in the army. What was it about that pushed you, you mentioned you being surrounded by those type of people. What was those type of people? What was the culture there? What were the problems that made you, not want to put in that extra little bit of work?
Well, first off, it went from doing working with the highest level of personnel in the Army and Green Berets at that highest level to an organization that was built around a made-up mission uh,
Mhm.
and a hierarchical bureaucracy of people who were marking time until they could collect their pension, both in uniform and out.
Mhm.
And that between those two things, a non-specified, non a fake mission requirement, and then the attitude of the people that were in the organization, those two just wore on me and drug me down. Uh,
Mhm.
and that was it. It was that culture and just I wouldn't call it toxic leadership like with the term we use today, because there
Mhm.
was, in order to have toxic leadership, you have to have leadership. There was no leadership. Uh,
Right.
it was whatever, and people that that did the bare minimum were allowed to do the bare minimum and less, and there was no reprimand, there was no correction, there were no very little of the standards of the organization were upheld, or
Mhm.
the standards were never established. So the standards became do whatever you want.
Mhm.
And that culture, ate at my gut, ate at my values.
Mm. And that actually, to be fair, we haven't actually said the buzzword on it yet, but what we're talking about here is quiet quitting. And what uh, what I think is really interesting there, and it's just like you're saying, is where this comes from for a lot of people. And we could talk about what exactly it is, and other opinions on it, but where it comes from is, like most things, it's from a good source, right? It's that you're not wanting to give extra to a place that does not value you. If you have red flags in the leadership of like what you're talking about, then you shouldn't be putting in that extra effort because you're not going to get the value for it. They're not appreciating your value, all those type of things. That comes from, I think, a good area, which is I should be valued for my work. Then I think there's the next step of it, which is okay, how do you want to change that? And this is my big I guess problem when reading about this and talking with people about quiet quitting is if you see the red flag for something and you just put your nose down and do the bare minimum work, trying to get yourself fired basically, which is what it is for a lot of time. If you're just doing the bare minimum over and over and over again, just trying to get yourself fired, then you're not changing the root of the problem at all. Like you're not remotely addressing it, because by just doing the minimum, you're passing it on to the next person. And that culture is going to continue in the same form that it is now versus, bringing those points, working, talking through communication, all those different aspects to help to change those type of problems. And if this is something where, you're on the lowest part of the totem pole and it's a problem that's all the way at the top, yeah, maybe you have to be a little bit more strategic with how you go about it, but putting your head down and just accepting it is only going to make things worse because it's going to perpetuate the same type of problems. That sense of value of your input, of your labor, that is the source of this concept, that's a good thing. But then you're completely devaluing that for all the future people by not addressing the problems inside the organization.
Right. And actually, I've had this conversation with clients before, in that, well, I'm, three levels down. How do I affect change? How do I
Mm-hmm.
affect cultural change? Well, you lead by example. You can either be part of the problem or you can be part of the solution. There's a very, in my book, a very black and white line there that says that, because if it's complacency.
Yeah.
If you allow it to happen and you become part of that culture, and I worked for a couple of organizations where the culture was a problem, and I felt it eating at me. And you know what? I didn't stick around to attempt to change it. I walked away from it. I quit the job and went someplace else. But if you can't afford to quit that job, then you owe it to yourself And you owe it to, like you said, people coming, following you, people around you to make the effort to make the change.
Mm-hmm.
If you if you set the example, human nature is amazing because what happens with human nature is we tend to migrate together, right? So it is not, if you're that outlier who wants to work hard, put more effort in, do the extra effort, it's not going to be easy to change the culture
Mm-hmm.
because what is everybody else? Everybody else has migrated into that culture and they've all accepted it as that's just the way it is. But if you want to change it, you're going to be the outlier and it's going to take a lot of effort. But you know
Yeah.
what? In the long run, you're going to feel better about yourself. You're going to have
Mm-hmm.
more satisfaction in your life, whether you get promoted, whether the culture actually changes. But you know what? You plant the seed for the change as opposed to just being another nug who just goes through the motions in life.
Mm-hmm.
That going through the motions in life sucks
Yeah.
because you never get what you want. You just get what you have. You get what you get. So if you want to be that person, the quiet quitter who just gets the minimum done, and you know you do X task and you get Y pay, and not you're not going to do X plus anything.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you're not going to get Y plus anything.
Yeah.
If you want to go through life like that, then hey, I guess the world needs those kind of people too. Uh, yeah,
Yeah. And, I think, talking about like the transactional way of looking at it, looking at it from the transactional perspective is good. We've talked about this before on the podcast and on these recordings for YouTube of you want to value yourself, treating yourself like a business. Well, what is the value that I'm providing? And then you should be repaid for that value that you are providing. But there's also always going to be incongruities there. I think it's a little bit idealist to be like, oh, I'm always getting paid what I think I should be getting paid. Because that's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. But then I think the interesting thing there, and you kind of touched on it, is this self-fulfilling prophecy aspect of it. And I think this is really interesting. So it's quiet quitting, but it's not quitting. But it's guaranteeing that you're going to get fired sometime in the near future. Because if you go to a job and you don't give a shit over and over and over again, to your point, there's businesses out there that work like that have that kind of a culture, and it's negative, and that is a problem. But for a lot of businesses, a lot of places that you would work, you are perpetuating a problem that's not as big as you think it is. And you're going to, it's dying on a hill that you don't need to die on type of thing, where it's like, well, I don't want to work for this company because I don't think they're doing things right. Therefore, I'm not going to work very well. And then you're going to be out of a job and you're not going to change anything. You're kind of just shaking your fist, but not really doing anything for it. And I think there's a really interesting piece there. When you were talking about culture, I kind of put this together that when we talk about problem solving all the time, especially in the more like social cultural type things, you see it in business too, but mostly in like the more like social cultural type things, there's this tendency to attribute a negative thing to some big negative thing that cannot be touched. And I think in the context of quiet quitting, company culture is that thing where it's like, this is how it is, and it will always be that way, and I can't change it, and it's evil, and it's this, and it's that, and it's this. And so therefore you just accept that. And it's a natural thing that we do, psychologically, to put things into buckets, right? This is good, this is bad. But the problem when you put everything into that bad bucket and try to just be like, oh, it's culture. Oh, it's systemic problems. Oh, it's this, all the different isms or different things, all of those. When you start to do that, you remove your personal responsibility from the problem. Because if it's so big, I always think about this, especially in terms of politics, when it's like the them. Ooh, the them, dad. The them are controlling it. They are controlling it. We can't do anything. They are in control. All that kind of stuff. Well, if they're really in control, then you have no reason to do anything.
yeah,
And you're removing, by giving it to this big, scary problem, you're removing your own personal requirement to take action for yourself and for the people around you inside of your community, inside your work, whatever it is. So that's the big thing that I've realized going through this, is that you can't make it some big, scary, evil thing as much as we like to, because when it comes down to it, it's always the smaller components, and smaller components are how you solve the problem. If you treat it as the big scary thing, you're never going to solve that problem, and you're just going to give up like a lot of people do.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you 100% because the people that blame the organization will blame everything else for anything else that's going on in their life and not accept responsibility. I didn't get promoted because Joey got, told the boss something or did whatever, right? It's that sort of an attitude that it's not my fault. All these other people are screwed up. It's not my fault that I don't work hard because that's just the culture of the organization.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what I was saying earlier is the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. If you accept that in your life, then if you accept it in this one spot, and let's say a 40-hour week, right? A 40-hour week that you spend doing the bare minimum, barely getting things done and only having to do what you actually have to positively do instead of exceeding the standards, exceeding the value added, bringing extra value, then you do that in other things in your life. You make it acceptable. I truly believe that. And I don't care whether it's, if you're that minimalist in my effort at work because, I'm underpaid, then you're going to be the minimalist in everything else you do in your life, whether it's a relationship with your partner, your spouse, a volunteer thing that you may do, whatever those things are, you will be a minimalist in all of them. I don't care what you say in your head. If it's acceptable in one area of your life, it's acceptable in all areas. You'll play this game because we do, humans. We'll try to say it's okay to do this over here, but it's not okay to do this over here. And I can think of 1,000 examples of other ways of looking at this from a criminal exchange versus an abundant exchange and a fair exchange to what your ethics are, because your values, who you are as a person, wherever you are is who you are. And if you're not being authentic, your authentic self, if you're pretending to be somebody else, then you're not being authentic and you're not being your authentic self and you're lying to yourself. And I'm digressing away from this, but the bottom line, it reminds me, you said something that reminded me of when I was in the Army, and the Army had, the physical fitness test, push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2-mile run. Wherever that is now, I've lost track of how many changes and not changes and all this sort of stuff. But the deal was, it used to just irk me, particularly if it was a peer that would say, well, if it wasn't the minimum, there wouldn't be a minimum, right? So if I only have to do 60 push-ups or 45 push-ups to get 60 points, and then 45 sit-ups to get 60 points, and run the 2 miles in 15 minutes to get 60 points, it's 180 points. That's the minimum I need to pass. So why should I do more? Just like, you suck. You're a POS, man. And I mean, you are. Because if you're not pushing yourself in your head, and here, this just popped back into my head. My TEDx talk. What was it about? Who's grading your life, right?
Yep.
I'm grading my life, and my grading is I push myself to the extent every time. I strive to be the best, to put forth all the effort needed to succeed and over succeed. Not, hey, how many answers do I have to get right on this test to pass it? Oh, 45. Okay, good, because I'll do 46. Then I've exceeded the standard. Yeah,
right. And I think one of the things, as we're wrapping up, the transactional aspect of it, and what you're saying of, if you're continuing to do the minimum, you create that pattern inside of your life, and that can have all sorts of negative consequences. The caveat I want to put to that is, as we say it's, transactional, you're looking for this benefit. There's also delayed gratification of this benefit. If I'm working 45 hours in a 40-hour job, and I do that for 3 months, but then that gets the pay raise, then we're accounting for that 5 hours that I was working extra each week. If you and what I mean with that example is that it's like we're calling it transactional, but I don't think people are actually doing the math. Like your example of, I'm not getting paid this, I don't feel valued, therefore I'm not going to work hard. Well, you get a $2 raise. Is that the math? Like, it's kind of like, I don't think you're actually doing the math. It's a feeling, but you're treating it as math. And I think that's part of the problem there is if you're going to do it as the math, then you should be doing that properly. Is this organization actually valuing me? Yes or no? Do I actually see a path forward? Yes or no? There's all these other questions that you can ask yourself to, adjust the calculus inside of that equation. But if you're not actually doing the math, if you're just going off of gut feelings and accepting that mediocrity, then you're going to fall into those negative patterns. And I think really if you're going through this as an employee, thinking about, or if you are quiet quitting, you're thinking about quitting, and you don't see that path forward. For me, what I think that really goes back to is an understanding of your purpose and an understanding of your vision and creating that vision for the future. And if you're wanting to you want some help understanding your purpose, if you want help to see if that vision is right and to help to, do that math better, if you want help putting out that equation, I'll nerd out, I get the chalkboard, we'll write that out. What you should do is go to findyourpurpose.coach and sign up for a vision analysis with me. And what we'll do is we'll go through, we'll see what's working in your life, what's not working. We'll talk about your purpose, see if your vision is aligned with your purpose, see if your actions you're taking are aligned with that purpose, and do a little bit of that math for you and see what the best path is forward. Because if you're not doing the math then, and you're just guessing, you're going off a gut feeling, you go to a math test, Dad, and you just guess, hey, what's x squared equals 5x plus da 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 da. Shoot, that sounds like 12 to me. Like, what? Come on, you got to do the math, right? So if you want to help doing that math and help making those changes inside of your life, go to findyourpurpose.coach.